To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, happy fall, y'all. Well, actually, in a couple days, it'll be fall. So there you go. You made it through another gardening season. Congratulations. But that brings up a good... Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. You can interrupt me. Go ahead.
I mean, come on. If that's not worth a bell, what are we doing here?
I don't even know anymore. I was going to say that this is a perfect opportunity to talk about time-sensitive vegetables. So we are marching close to frost, wouldn't you say? How far?
Yeah. Single
how
file
far along
line.
are you until your first frost?
I think as of this, when this airs, I think I'm like 5 to 6 weeks. My first frost is November 1st, average first frost.
You know what? I forgot when my first frost is. It keeps eluding me, and I feel like every time I say it, it changes. I feel like I just make it up in my head. So I'm going to give everybody the actual first frost date, because I'd like to know myself. And
it may have changed, but mine just shifted because I think they did a recalculation.
Oh, I've got some stuff to say about that too. No.
Oh, here we go.
Nothing like that. Just like in general. Man, why is it so difficult this year? November 3rd is my first frost date, technically. So, still a little ways off, but we are getting close. Now, and this is to set the precedence for this conversation. When you get your first frost, it's pretty much almost frost after frost after frost, right?
Yes.
When I get my first frost, I might not have another frost for a month. So there is that distinction between the two of us in our different zones. So I do want to keep that in mind wherever you are, that, you know, how we handle things may be different, because we know our growing areas, as you should know yours, and your frost dates and the average weather and stuff like that. So there's a reason why I call it yo-yo season / the heartbreak zone.
Yeah, that's, let's pack it up. I mean, there's nothing more important that we're going to say in this episode besides that, right? And obviously you have the advantage when it comes to that, but a part of your weather pattern also leads you up to hot, like all the way up into it. Like you're planting your cool weather vegetables and it's kind of like, where's the sunscreen? Because it's still baking out. But yeah, it's absolutely. And it took, of course, for some that may be like just venturing into later season gardening, it took me a while to really understand what that meant, and we could talk about what that means for me specifically.
Well, I'm sure we'll get into it. But we do need to talk about the time sensitive vegetables and, regarding frost, stuff like that. We're going to really focus on this time of year. We may revisit it when it gets to be warm again. Why are you holding your hand up like you're palming a basketball?
This is my signal for when the spotlight's on me. I just wanted to make sure
I got that. Spotlight's on Batavia, everybody. But in the meantime, if you would like, you can support the show by becoming a Patreon, or you could go and do the Apple subscriptions and get an extra episode a month, and also know that you're helping support the show and keep us on the air so we can help more gardeners learn to grow and grow for change. And don't worry, I'm not ending the episode because I said that, so we're going to keep going. So, let's see. If I had to think about an order to do this in, I would say that we should probably start with the more sensitive stuff and move forward, because I don't know everybody's zone. Obviously, I don't know where your exact zone is, wherever the listener lives. But I know that there's probably somebody listening that is just marching straight to their first frost date. So the things that you plant in fall, what would you say would be the most sensitive to frost?
I'm going to say some of the Asian greens like bok choy.
Oh, good one.
Like, I think there's something about the softness that, and I'm going to go ahead and cheat and use this word, the tenderness of those leaves that have a hard time bouncing back.
Okay.
Right. You know, so there are two things that we'll talk about. We'll talk about something that kills the root of a plant, or as some people may say, especially if you're in Louisiana, the root, which is a whole different conversation. So the root, and then there is whatever's on top of the soil, like,
foliage.
The leaves and such, or the fruit. I have trouble saying that word, and you know that. You know that's the reason why I didn't
that's
say
why I
that
helped
word.
you. Yeah, I
go
used to
ahead, for
say
the people.
foliage, and somebody made fun of me. It's foliage. This was years ago. Somebody made fun of me. But no. Yeah.
It wasn't
No,
me.
it wasn't you. It was before you. It was before you. But there's also aspects to that we'll get into to recognize as we get through each one of these parts of them, what can help a plant rebound too and make it last longer. So just because it's tender, it doesn't mean that it's a death sentence for it. Now, just to get it out of the way, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squashes, anything you grow in the summertime, more than likely that puts a fruit on, frost comes, it's gone. So just keep that in mind. But we're focusing on stuff that's planted for fall. And I don't have experience with bok choy in the cooler weather, so I'm actually going to do that this year, which I'm excited to see, because I did it over the spring and I was super successful, but I was going the opposite way and I was battling the heat. So coming this way, we'll see how it goes. But I also plan to put it in my greenhouse where there's more protection, so that should help. But lettuce is another one too.
So, yeah, and I think that lettuce there are probably more varieties of lettuce than anything else. And I've had lettuce in the garden pretty late, and it's a mixed bag. Even sometimes when I've had frost and a variety has survived it, in other cases, it doesn't. And then some of that has to do with getting down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit and how long you're staying there for even that first night.
Have you ever grown head lettuce?
I think that's an embarrassing moment on. Have I? Yes, I've grown head lettuce. Has it ever formed a head? No,
I've never grown head lettuce. So my thought, I usually grow romaine types. I've grown like the and I've grown like is it safe to say like a loose leaf lettuce? Is that that's a technical term? And I don't care for that, so I don't really dabble with it too much. But I feel like the loose leaf lettuce is more tender than the romaine lettuce. But I think that, and if I had to assume, which I'm going to go right on a limb and do it, that the head lettuce would probably be less tender than the romaine. I would just have to assume that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so I've tried like a few different varieties in the spring. It bolts before it could get to the forming of the head. So I'll continue to try it. Head lettuce is a lot of lettuce for me.
Yeah, I just don't care for it.
Since I generally use the cut and come again method. There's something about that I'm picturing, like, and for this conversation right now, let's just use iceberg lettuce because it's this big solid head. I kind of think about, like, if it's freezing all the way through, you're done with that too. That's the thing, So a light frost is something that, maybe the outer leaves would be damaged, but maybe the majority of the head. If you have a head of lettuce in your garden and the frost is coming, cut it out. I mean, cut the head out.
Well, no, I mean, let's not trip. They can take a light frost, and I mean, there is different ratings and frosts and freeze and stuff like that. A light frost is like 32, 31 degrees. So, it can definitely take that and enhance the flavor and make it sweeter. But that's something, now I want to say something, and this is a little insight into my thought process behind growing vegetables and stuff, which it may be helpful for some people, but when I think about the different types of lettuces like we just went through, and even though I haven't grown the head lettuce, I'm just, as I think about it, I'm like, well, the leaf is thicker, so it's crunchier, which typically means that it's more hardy, right? Typically. It doesn't have to be, but it's also filled with a lot more water. So there's an issue there too. And when I look at it, like loose leaf lettuce and even romaine, like if it froze, it'll get, kind of soft. You can cut that out. But as far as like a head lettuce goes, I don't think you can really cut it out too successfully if it got down to the core. The benefit is it's, you could remove outer leaves and you probably, still get your head lettuce. So whenever I go to grow a new vegetable, I kind of look at the plant itself, and this is before I even get the seed or anything. I'm just like thinking in my head, and then I start kind of forming an opinion about what possibly could happen before I go to it. And that can kind of help me visualize what's going to happen in my garden. So I do that a lot, actually, more than I'd like to admit.
Okay. For me, generally, so my average first frost would be November the 1st. That's the average date. And by then, there's very little new growth of anything happening. Right. So when I say like cut the head of lettuce out, it's like I'm basically, as I've said before, using my garden as storage.
Yeah.
Right. So the roots are still intact and it hasn't started to break down. You know how like every step from your plant to your kitchen, you lose nutrients when you harvest something. So I leave it in the garden a while longer, until I am ready to get to it. But so whatever I'm cutting away, whatever's left is what's going to be left. I've had pretty warm Thanksgiving days. I've had some pretty warm days in December, but you fold in all of, the least amount of daylight is where we're headed towards, the absolutely cooler temps. And the way these plants are, again, there's not a lot of new growth, which I think it's important to note. That's for me in my area. I've never been able to gauge for you, like, is everything kind of at a standstill, or are things still actively growing? In my area,
like in the winter time?
And you're November going, late fall going into
Usually
December.
Around December, it's a mixed bag. If we are getting warm days, things will grow. But usually like mid-December to about mid-January, the garden gets pretty stagnant. I don't think there's a lot of development occurring. But once we get to about mid-January, and we can start to get some warm days, we'll still be cold. And it can go either way. We can have like really cold days or pretty warm days. And when we get those warm days, things start to pick up. And then come February, it's like it just kind of starts steadily improving after that. But a lot of that has to do too within my growing space, the amount of shade that the garden gets. So it does make a big difference. And I have to take that into account. So, one thing we can say, well, hold on. Let me wait before we get to this part. Let's go through a couple more just tenderish plants, like in order, that we need to keep an eye out on. So we've gone bok choy, lettuce. What's another one that's kind of more tender?
I think things like arugula and chard is probably like, now we're teetering on to, it won't wipe them out, but you may deal with more damage than, it's going to be worth for you to continue to babysit those plants.
Yeah, and I would say that cauliflower is right there with it. So in my...
I've never grown cauliflower
in my
fall.
experience, cauliflower is more tender than broccoli. So, you get a lot of that damage, and then the problem is there becomes a point of no return, where it's like you start to get damage, you cut it away, you start to get more damage, you cut it away. Next thing you know, you've got a stalk with like a cauliflower or just a couple leaves on it that just can't keep up with the growth. There's nothing to feed the plant. And that's why we want to get things started as early as possible. So if you're even in up where Batavia is, you still have a couple weeks of growth. Like you can still get, if you pick a hardy enough plant, you can still go and get a start from a store or some kind of seller and put it in the ground and still get that growth to hopefully help you get through that. But by planting the garden out appropriately, because the ones that we just mentioned, I would say they would go to a light freeze, which would be probably 30 to 28 degrees. I think that's light freeze territory.
Yeah, I've had arugula that starts to look like the slimy lettuce, like in your crisper that you buy from the grocery store, and you look up in day 3, it's all kind of icky. Like I've had it look like that after we get down to, because I mean, it's 32 is freezing, like hard stop, right? So once it gets down there, chard, it depends. I'm still torn between if it's the more mature the plant is, the better it does, or the younger the plant is, the better it does. So I've had some chard survive as far as the plant goes, and I've had leaves absolutely damaged, and it's gone both ways. Smaller plants versus larger, more mature, more specifically larger leaves. Let me say that. They're a little bit more floppy.
Yeah, I've had that, and then broccoli would be my next one. That would be starting to get kind of damaged pretty good. Now, they're surprisingly pretty hardy until you get the head. That's the trick. That head is tender, a lot more tender than the leaves. So a lot of times what people will do, and we'll get into protecting too, but specifically for this plant, if you have the head, they can take the leaves, and I've seen people like rubber band them over just to protect the frost from setting on it. So you can do that too. But, again, this is a little bit harder of a frost that we're talking about now, a little bit harder of a freeze. And then I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you go right into like kale, cabbage, rutabagas, turnips. Like they're all pretty hardy.
I've never had cabbage in my garden that late, but I feel like, I wanted to bring this up with the head lettuce. I feel like that's kind of in the same family. Now, obviously the leaves of cabbage are thicker than any head lettuce you're going to have. But I'm not sure how well that plant would survive. And let me say that the balance between how much of the cold hits that plant. Like I feel like if it freezes, it's done. Right? So bouncing between frost and freezing, just based on the way the leaves are folded on each other. Now, sure, I mean, if you peel back a lot, you probably have something in the center that's still good as it works its way through. I've had kale look floppy and bounce back just fine. And when I say just fine, every leaf isn't saved. Don't get me wrong. But
kale and cabbage are the two plants that last the longest in my garden every year if they get taken out. So that is one thing. And kale is, of all the plants, the hardiest of them all. So I rarely, if my plant is established enough, I rarely have a dead plant from just pure frost. Now, we're not factoring in pests. We're not factoring in a combination of things, but I'm just saying in general from just cold. If I've had like a good year and I haven't had a lot of treatments to do and everything, typically speaking, that kale will last the longest, and cabbage is right behind it. The problem comes in when we have a wet winter. Then we start to have problems because then we start getting rots and stuff like that. So that's something that you do because, cabbage sits low to the ground. So that moisture just kind of stays around those bottom leaves, and I will get rot on the stem. But as far as like just cold, maybe an outer leaf is gone. But if it's starting to head, it's going to make it. So that's my experience. Okay. But again, our winters are totally different. And so
yeah. Well, I mean, I can't imagine I'd have cabbage once winter hits. Was it 21st of December or something? I've had kale in my garden and collards, of course, which I'm sure we are going to get to. And I think you're right. Like how many snows can it really take?
What's snow?
And fortunately for me,
what is snow? You know what I mean? Like that's the thing is like we don't even get that. So
yeah. Yes, I mean we've had 6, 8, 10 inches some winters. Now, I haven't had food in the garden then. And then when I say winters, I mean Decembers, excuse me. And other Decembers, it's been pretty dry. I think it's a really, really good point about how wet your area is, though. And that definitely kind of impacts when you should be pulling things out of the garden, what methods you should be taking to try to protect them. So all of that folds in. If it's your first fall going into winter gardening and you're anywhere in between our zones, man and I, just prepare yourself for some loss. Like we're pushing the envelope here.
Yeah, but it's not impossible.
So some things just won't do what you want them to do.
And it's not impossible though. I think that's the important part is it does take a little bit of human intervention, but it's not impossible. Mm-hmm. Last year, I had a lot of losses, but my losses were caused by overcrowding. So what happened was I seeded and then I had an animal get into my bed and stir up all the soil. But then what happened on top of that was everything germinated. So I was like, well, I'll just leave it. And then I just got like this mass of like plants. And there was zero airflow getting into it. And what happened was I was getting, what was it? It was like a white fungus rot. I can't remember the name of it. And and so I had to pull that stuff up. And once I did that and once I noticed that, which it took a lot longer than I'd like to admit to notice that there was an issue. And I pulled everything out that was bad, left what was there with some spacing. Guess what happened? Things started to grow again, but they were getting airflow, stuff like that, because that soil stays so wet and moist in the wintertime. I mean, I don't even have to water in the wintertime barely at all. Maybe once a week, if that. So, that's most people's rainy season.
Yeah, carrots, along with the other roots that you were talking about, that's a good example of something that, I've seen people, I've not done it myself, I've seen people harvest carrots, like digging them up out of snow.
Yeah, they can definitely take it, but they can also rot in the process. So there's a little bit of both to it, but if we just focus on temperature, let's keep it real, son, and just focus on one thing that we can, try to manage. Then, collards, as the one you brought up, I think that's one of, if not the hardiest vegetable you can put in your garden as far as freezing goes.
Yeah, agreed. I think that, and we're generally saying collards and kale, but there are various varieties. Like there's some varieties for kale that are bred to take the cold. Right? Like they are designed for winter. And then I imagine that there's the same thing for collards. I've only grown a few kind of collards. Don't worry, I'm expanding. So I'm saying that as a disclaimer. There may be some collards that are a little bit more, I shouldn't even use the word tender, aren't as cold hardy as other collards may be. There is a winter choy, now that I think I can actually picture it, and it has a picture on the package with snow around it. So I mentioned bok choy at the top of the episode, which again, it's just much more tender. And the example of the winter choy is the exact opposite. I think tatsoi, Tatsoi, I stumbled across this a few years ago. It's super, super cold tolerant, super hardy. It's I think it's called corn salad, or some other kind of, it took on some type of play name for it. Mach, Mache. The gardener that I followed some years back that was in the Chicagoland area, and he grew, or at least he maintained his garden in an unheated hoop house. I picked up a lot of vegetables that I saw doing well in his garden. Now he had multiple layers of protection.
I've seen that video. He had an abnormal amount of layers going on.
Yeah, like it's, the first layer of plastic over the bed, and then he had an actual greenhouse that was, had plastic film around it. I think even maybe another inside of that greenhouse, he also had like what do you call them, with the cold frames with the plastic or glass top. So yeah, it was definitely his intention, and certain that he got to the point of like vegetables surviving in January, February. Maybe they really were kind of dormant where he really wasn't able to harvest them. But he definitely, as things kind of started, the days started to get a little bit longer, things bounced back. And that I have aspired to do that kind of thing. But boy, that's like on my 30-year list. Maybe 13 years. I don't know.
I mean, you got to be dedicated for that, you know.
Yeah. Very intentional, too.
Right, just real quick before we get into that, because that was a very good segue, I do want to mention spinach. Spinach is very hardy, but it is also very susceptible to being wet all the time. So just remember that, too. Spinach is right up there with collards, I believe. They can take a lot. But it's also very sensitive to heat, so keep that in mind. Now, going into what Batavia was talking about as far as like helping these time-sensitive vegetables, so you can go all the way back to the beginning and start with your bok choy and your lettuces and stuff like that, and creating a simple hoop house makes a world of difference for a number of reasons. So like in my area, where I mentioned at the top of the show that like we'll get a frost and then we may go another month without one, throwing a quick cover over it can save me from that initial cold blast. And then I really haven't skipped a beat, because one, the plants that are in there are totally ready for it, and you know, they can take the cold, and B, I've kept that soil warmer through that process, so they can still just bounce back really quick. The other benefit to that is when you have them covered with plastic, they rebound from the freeze quicker. And that is something that I've learned for all of these vegetables, from bok choy all the way to collards and spinach. It's the quickness of the rebound of the temperatures the next day that make all the difference in the world in the survival rate of your plants. End of story.
Yep. So, and for plastic, make sure the plastic isn't touching the leaves. But I've also started to use frost cover, which is more of like a cloth-like material.
Do you
it's
like
not
that?
Cloth, but you get my point.
Compared
I like
to the plastic?
And I hate to admit that I liked it compared to the plastic. Yeah. Like the plastic is just such a pain. I'll probably still use it in some places. The plastic is more durable. All of it gets icky, you know, by the time you go through like a full winter. Plastic is much more economical compared to the frost cover. That's the only reason why I say I hate that I like it so much. I've had the same frost cover. I think there's different grades of the frost cover. Like it's supposed to provide protection down to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. It's supposed to provide protection down to, and so on and so forth. And there's light transmission that shifts the more protection you get. You could be down to like 50% light transmission, which again, if you're maintaining vegetables, doesn't really matter that much. But to your point, if I have, let's say on October 31st, let's pretend the temperatures are dropping. It's been 40 degree, high 30 degrees overnights for a week. It's just, again, we'll go through this. And then I'm watching the temperature decline. It's dark much earlier, right? So with daylight savings time coming up, it's probably 6 or 7 o'clock when it's getting dark now. I'm just, estimating this stuff here. So by the time you get to 8, 9, 10 o'clock, my temperatures are 36, 37 degrees. Let's say midnight, I get down to 32 degrees. This is the moment, right? From midnight up until what time does it take to get above 32 degrees? And 33 doesn't count. Like it needs to be like back into the 40s and sunny for that plant to rebound. If it takes me all the way until 2 o'clock the next afternoon to reach that temperature, my plants are still struggling through the next night, which for me in my area could be getting back closer to 32 degrees. So it goes through that whole dance. And it doesn't mean I've had situations where it's been 3 or 4 days of that, and my collards will still bounce back. My kale will still bounce back on the other side of it. Most everything else is going to be done once you've had 3, 4, 5 days of pretty consistent freezing temps.
So I have not used the frost cloth. I use the plastic, and I actually really don't even really need to use it. But it is, first of all, I don't like using plastic. Second of all, like you said, it's kind of a pain. So I have been interested in possibly switching to something. And at the rate I use it, I'm not overly concerned with how much, because I can put it on for a couple of days and then take it off. And my question is, oh, look at there. I just got a link in my messages. But the thing is with it is like last year, and I know Batavia is going to roll her eyes. Now we had the big freeze and I was out of town. And so I knew it was coming. So I set it up and I just walked away from it. And I said, well, here we go. And when I came back, I had a temperature sensor outside of it and inside of it. And I was reading the temperatures when I got back in town, and this is over Christmas, and it had gotten down to like 16 degrees outside, but it got to 20 degrees inside, right? But the next day, it only got up to a high of like 29, I believe, for the rest of my garden. But inside that cloth, it had gotten up to 58 degrees. So you can see that in that time period, like, yeah, things did freeze, but they thawed back out. And lo and behold, when I pulled it off, it looked like nothing had skipped a beat. I mean, it's not like it had grown a lot, but it had definitely came back. It had, it didn't have any noticeable sign of damages, where the other beds next to it with the same stuff were showing damages. So that protection and that heat the next day made all the difference in the world. And that's why, like, where we are, and I'm in zone 8A in North Carolina, we don't have to really worry about it as much because, yeah, we may get a 20-degree night, but the next day could easily be 60 degrees. And so you're going to have that rebound temperature. Now, it's a headache because then you start getting things that want to bolt. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not the worst. And I mean, it can get up to 45, 50 degrees, whatever. But as soon as that sun starts to hit it, my non-technical way of explaining it would be, and I'm probably going to use every word wrong known to man, but the water molecules inside of the plant don't stay frozen, and then they can kind of redistribute the water throughout it. So you don't get that dieback and you don't get that harsh burn on the plants where you feel like you need to remove leaves and stuff like that. They can rebound. And that's why my greenhouse is so successful, because, and I'm not trying to trip and be like, I'm getting pounds and pounds out of my, my 6x8 greenhouse, but it does, like, whatever I put in there, because I'm, again, planting cold tolerant varieties, but it doesn't really get that hard frost on it ever. And then the next day, it always is going to warm up every single time. It'll warm up when the sun goes in the greenhouse, so I can continue that process. So it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely, it does. I mean, I think that changes everything as it relates to whether or not you are gardening in the winter or you're just basically buying yourself some time to get the last few vegetables out. So,
and I mean, even in, like, if you're in a zone like Batavia's where it stays cold, I think it's almost easier because you can set that on there and just let it ride, basically, and just manage the water inside of it. You may have to vent it during the day or something, but you don't have to remove the cloth and take it off and put it back on every day like we do. So you could extend your season by so much. And when it comes down to it, like when we had that cold frost, like I didn't even worry about the cabbages and collards and stuff like that. I put it on the tenders like the lettuce and stuff, and we had lettuce. We definitely had at some point to pull off some outer leaves, but I mean, let's face it, in the wintertime, we don't get perfect heads of lettuce. We definitely are pulling off the outer leaves and stuff like that, but it makes a huge difference in what you're doing. So think about it when you're setting up your gardens in the winter, or you're putting something to plant, or you're going to right now. Think about protecting it, and not necessarily from keeping the cold off of it, but rebounding that cold. I think that's the part that a lot of people miss. And it took me a long time to realize that as well. Bless you.
Excuse me. Thank you. Yeah, I think I want to underscore the note around. He said we're not getting perfect vegetables then anyway. Right, and I think that the look of some of the vegetables that, depending on how long those plants have been in, like I still have, I still want to plant a fresh round of cabbage, but the cabbage moth insists that it eats it, right? So I have a new 6-pack or 4-pack or something of collards, and those greens, if I can get them in and get the worms under control, they're going to be younger plants versus the ones that are in the cage baby that have been battling for their lives all season long, going back to the end of April. And so that makes a difference as far as kind of what these plants look like when I'm harvesting them, on December 1st, right? And so generally speaking, I am like tossing a lot of these outer leaves depending on the plant, because at some point, again, they're tattered, they're worn, they may have gotten hit by a frost. I'm getting something off of these plants, but it's not like I'm having this voluptuous, basket of leaves. That's not what it is. And that's okay, because at that point, again, I know this is the last of the days for these vegetables.
Well, I mean, I think too, at that point, you're just thankful you're getting something out of your garden, to be honest. I mean, it's come to a point where it's like, look, I shouldn't even really be able to grow. And the fact that we're still eating from it, it's like, it's a blessing. So I think that's definitely something that we can think about moving forward. And that's why I wanted to try these row covers, because the one thing that the plastic does give me issues with is that moisture, because it doesn't let it out at all. And so it'll just sit there and stew and be really stale air inside of it. And that's why I was kind of thinking about going to the frost cloth this year, because, it'll still let air flow through it to some extent.
Yeah. You don't have that same level of condensation that can form on that plastic and drip down on your plants.
And then if you're going to use plastic, just make sure you're getting the right thickness for your area. So you can't just go get, there's no need for me to use super thick plastic, but I also can't use the thinnest plastic. Whereas you wouldn't use what I'm using, you would use a different millimeter plastic. I don't even know what I'm using at this point. It's so long ago.
I've picked up 6 millimeter plastic just from your regular big box store. And I haven't, interestingly enough, I haven't read what the true difference is between greenhouse plastic versus
it's more UV protectant, so it doesn't break down as fast. So I mean, that's one thing people need to realize is like plastic breaks down, but it doesn't break down in compost. It just breaks down into microplastics. So it doesn't really go anywhere, but it just becomes very useless. Like plastic pots and stuff like that. Like I'm not even. Every time I come across one around here, unless it's like one of the black nursery pots, everything else I just kind of get rid of, Ag fabric is what you sent me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I used that last fall, and I've actually used it all throughout the spring and summer, now going back into fall. For my area, this is really important. For my area, instead of using insect netting, I use the row cover, which is really for frost, for colder temps. I use that, and I was wondering whether or not it would get too hot, right? And so for my area, just again, probably the same reason why I can grow collards in June and July. No issues. Like it wasn't like it smothered the plants or anything like that. So it was good to me.
Yeah, that's something that I do want to bring up too. Those I did a video about it last year on Sandy Bottom Homestead about those little green plastic greenhouses people buy. You can get them really cheap. Man, those things are garbage, dude. They are absolutely worthless. They give you very little protection, but it was just like you said, they heat up super fast. So, a lot of times what you recommend is like before you go to work in the morning, you roll up the window and so it can air out during the day. But if you live somewhere like you do and you go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, like you're going to be letting in like sub-freezing temperatures. It ain't going to do a damn bit of good.
Yeah, exactly.
But it ain't going to do any good to be 80 degrees in there in the afternoon, you know? So you're talking wild temperature swings, because those get the same temperature inside as it does outside during the night. So even my greenhouse will get, before I did anything else, it got the exact same temperature outside as inside. Now, I've made modifications to improve that, where now I'm keeping it on average 4 to 6 degrees warmer. So that's a huge difference. You're talking a world of difference, but beforehand, it wasn't much of a change.
Yeah, I think, gosh, this is, I'm looking at the time. I think
we have a little bit.
There's so many kind of gadgets and things like that. It's like, oh, buy it for this purpose.
I thought you were going to use the G word. I thought you were going to use the right one. Gimmicks.
Which is the yeah, gimmicks. Thank you. I was searching for the word. Thank you. And, I really hope that the green plastic greenhouse works in someone's garden somewhere in the world. I don't know if I've met anyone. But I think you look at, even like, you go back to the row cover. I think that they give some pretty pretty specific guidance when they talk about like temperatures that this is said to protect plants under. Now, we also have microclimates, right? Yeah, so my weather app is not, I don't have a setup where I can say the true temperature at my house, right? I'm just using the app that comes on my iPhone, so it could be 5 degrees cooler, in my backyard. It definitely is going to be at least 2, 3, 4 degrees warmer in the front yard where the sun is still shining then, compared to the backyard that gets so little daylight, once we get into the later part of the year. So I say that to say, like, just here's the old Batavia, temper your expectations.
Well, I think, I can give you an example of that. My yard compared to my...
Wait, I said that with a hug.
I did.
Did you hear it in my voice?
I did.
That came with a hug.
My yard compared to my neighbor's yard, so my yard sits a little bit lower and his is a little bit higher. We'll actually get a frost, usually, I've noticed in the past couple of years, about 3 days before him. So, you can kind of put that into perspective. So elevation makes a difference. And then you also have how much wind your property gets. So like for me, my lot is very wooded. So I only have wind that comes in really from one direction. So that works as protection. Now I have my garden split into 2 sections. And so the wild garden is actually protected on 3 sides. And one side that is actually protected on is from the direction the wind would come in on. So it doesn't get beat as hard. So you can see how this kind of unfolds, and you can use this to your advantage, knowing that. But like you said, if you don't have temperature sensors and you can get like a Wi-Fi temperature sensor for like $10 off Amazon, a little Bluetooth one. It's super cheap. I have one in my greenhouse. I need to get a couple more. Very cheap, and you can use those. But at the same time, like your apps on your phones and stuff like that, they work just fine. I mean, at this time of the year, the way I'm looking at it is if you are protecting from your first frost, like, so what, you're a couple days, if you're not going to get that first frost because you have a little microclimate around your area, you're just protected, good for you. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but just know that is a thing. If you were like looking and you had something very tender, like like last year we were trying to make our tomatoes go as long as possible, and we had a early freeze last year. So last year in October, we had a frost, and then 2 days later it was 85 degrees again. And then we didn't get another frost all the way until December. But guess what happened in that first frost? It wiped out my tomatoes, where I really had another month to 2 months of growing time left. So you can see how that kind of set us back last year.
So I'm glad you brought up tomatoes, because you would have bit my head off of if I would have brought up tomatoes. So tomatoes and peppers, So for me in my garden, and I want to be explicit, in my garden, I'm not telling you what you do with your peppers in yours. I've had frost and peppers still on the plant, and they be okay. Like they're not frost, scald or whatever the term is. I'm not, if it's a day, which again, a lot of times it's not, if it's just one night, it's going to get down to, frost, then I'll let them live. Right. Now for me, peppers generally do really well once I bring them inside. They keep for quite a while, even on the dining room table, or in a cooler place like my basement. I've had also peppers where I have pulled the plant up. I like to pull all my plants out going into the season. That's the best version of Batavia. If you see plants still in my garden in January, like they're dead and just looking like a ghost town, it was a rough fall for your girl. So I've actually pulled plants out of the ground, put them into a big container, and stuffed them into the garage. Right? Like it's a couple of degrees warmer in there than it's going to be once that temperature goes down. Because I just didn't have time to I didn't have time to take peppers off of the plant. To pick the peppers. And so that worked just fine. I've brought them inside, which is kind of a little bit icky because you're bringing everything else inside with you too. And these are not necessarily containers of peppers. These are, again, just things I've pulled up by the root. So tomatoes, though, I pull them out before frost because they were just the saddest thing you'll ever see in a garden. Once that frost hits them. So just to know, everything isn't like D-Day. Summer vegetables, generally speaking, you're pretty much done. But some of these cooler weather crops, you could still get some life out of them.
I wouldn't have bit your head off for doing it. I just don't want to give the impression that we're trying to make tomatoes grow throughout the year. I remember when I had first got my greenhouse and I put a video up, somebody asked me what kind of tomatoes are you going to grow in it during the winter? And it was like, no, that's not how this works. This is not a heated greenhouse. This is an unheated greenhouse. And I was very clear about that. But the general consensus among people, and even when I first started thinking about it myself, was like, okay, cool. Let's see what we can do. But as I started looking into it more, it's like, no, this is not an option. There is no option to put a tomato in here because it will, in fact, die. So, and that's dude, trying to keep something at 50 degrees or higher at night in the wintertime, that's a whole next level thing. And it's not impossible, but I don't feel like doing it. You know what I mean? You got to have power. You got to have protection. You got to have backups. You got to have, watering. It's just a whole next level scenario. And then you've got to have special venting because you can't have stuff coming in, like cold air coming in, and it'll shock them. And it's just way too much. And that's why I think, not to get on any kind of soapbox or anything, but the seasonal eating thing is I accept that we're not going to get any tomatoes in the winter. And I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to move on and I'm going to eat my greens and be happy and be regular and all that stuff and move on.
I
don't want to hear about you being regular.
So
you being regular. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's not, you'd never hear me go there with you on the show. On the show. When I call you at 7 a.m., yeah, baby. So tomato pie. Check out Young Ben on Instagram under Sandy Bottom Homestead. One of his reels, from, I don't know, about when you hear this, about 6 weeks ago, he flashes the recipe, just the recipe. So the important part is I have made tomato pie and my heart is broken that I'm this big age and I've just started to eat tomato pie. But the saving grace is I've also frozen individual slices and then taken them out of the freezer and reheated them. And it is my eyes, it's still good. Beautiful. It's still gorgeous and delicious. And so that's your best chance at having a taste of tomato.
Unless you can
do that,
Yeah, preserving and stuff like that is how we kind of mitigate that. But as far as fresh goes, we don't even worry about it. So there you go. That's tender, time-sensitive vegetables and really just plan it out, knowing what's tender and then planning out your planting. And even still, you have time to get this stuff in the ground. And with a little bit of protection, you can go a little bit longer. Wouldn't you say?
I agree. And I don't normally do this, but I am going to send you directly to my YouTube channel if you're interested in low tunnels. We talked about hoop houses. I have a video from a couple of years ago, but it's still the same. I still use the same method. I did 3 different methods of building low tunnels. So I think it's quite literally that. I think that's the name of it. I was searching. I couldn't get to my channel. Couldn't get to the name of the video. It's under the DIY playlist. So check it out if you're interested in, walking through what that looks like. It's uber simple. I use the same method to use my regular covers, the row covers, the tulle fabric. It's all the same process. I think the most important note when it comes to that kind of thing is making sure you don't have a hothouse in there. And if your temperature requires it, allows for some level of ventilation if you're using plastic. That's definitely what I was using in that video. So yeah. The channel is Be Better Garden.
And we may or may not have an episode coming up about everything covers. We haven't discussed that at all yet, but we may have that coming up at some point because there is a lot of things you can do with covers, a lot of different uses and stuff. And like Batavia said, the structure can be the same. So there is that. And if I do get a cloth, I will test it out on my channel as well. I would be curious to see how it compares. Well, now since I got the plastic, this sounds like fun. Comparing which one does better for me. I don't know. It might be too much work.
Oh, I love a good garden experiment. It's how to build hoops, low tunnels for your garden beds. 3 ways is the name of the video. And I immediately started picturing 2 beds side by side, but one of them has a bunch of tomatoes in it. So there's that. But if I could have planted side by side, and then use the plastic for one and the row cover for another. Add it to the list, Leonard. 2029.
2029, let's do it. But what we're not going to do in 2029 or wait until 2029 is we're not going to wait to tell you about the Planter app. This is a great app. It's a longtime sponsor of the show, and for good reason, because it's an amazing app. It helps you plan your garden, gives you all your growing guides, your planting dates specific to your area once you enter them in. It's a drag and drop interface. You can use it on your computer, your tablet, or your phone. You ever sat in a doctor's office and thought, hey, I'd like to just go ahead and plan my garden? Boom, go for it. You know what I'm saying? Ain't nothing stopping you. Nice and clean, square foot interface, combative and companion plantings. It's all there, man. Growing guides out the wazoo. Thousands of varieties, customizable just for you. You are a gardener and you deserve to plan your garden appropriately, and the Planter app is there to help you, and it's available on Android and Apple. And that's the Planter app. And you can use the link down below to get a discount on the Planter app. And that being said, since I said Planter app, you know what time it is, everybody. It's time for the Spotify question of the day.
While you look this up, I'm putting the spotlight on my
Again?
head. Baby, let me tell you, that hoop video is from November 2019, and I was fit. I could see the definition of my chin. This was definitely pre-pandemic and all the things that it was pre-tomato pie. Oh, good gosh.
Which would you rather have, a defined chin or a tomato pie?
Well, tomato pie every day and twice on Sundays, but that's the reason why there's not a defined chin.
Holla at your boy. All right, so
question of the day.
Patricia, this is right up your alley, writes us, and she goes, it's not really a question, but a comment. Shredded paper and cardboard combined with urine makes a ton of compost. Patricia, thank you. You're exactly right. So, Batavia does not do compost, and she would definitely not do this. Her eyes are giant right now.
No. This is the moment when you think you know me. I'm like, if I have, you know what I have the most of in my life? Shredded paper or paper that can be shredded, cardboard, and urine, baby. Patricia, Did this just become my garden love language? I was, for a split second, I thought twice about, forget about the mice and said, wait a minute, now I can do this.
So I'd learned about, the cardboard and shredded paper. Yes, definitely. But the urine part is something a lot of people have a hard time with. I came across a YouTube channel years ago. I think it's a Canadian channel. Well done gardening channel. I can't find it again to save my life. They had done a handful of episodes and every one of them were great. The style, everything, but they just didn't stick with it. But they made their own compost, and this lady was saying how they pee in a bucket in the wintertime and then they dump it in their compost. And so I immediately was like, oh yeah, we're going to do this for sure. We didn't pee in a bucket, but it's on a regular basis. My son will be outside and be like, can I go pee in the compost? Like, you damn right. So urine is filled with nitrogen. That's why it burns plants when you pee on your grass and stuff, because you're just basically over fertilizing it. So it's a very good, it does two things for your compost. One, it gives it that nitrogen boost, but two, it keeps it moist. And if you're turning it and you're aerating it, you don't get the smell, nothing like that. Like, we've done it for years and it works wonders. So I definitely agree with Patricia. It is the unsexy side of gardening, but there have definitely been times when I've been filming a video and I'll walk over my compost pile and be like, oh, hold on. And I've turned the camera off. So I'm like, I don't want to catch getting caught peeing in my compost, but it really does work well. And what it does too, if you're a man and you're doing it, is it creates a channel into it, which allows air to feed down into the compost too, which is fuel for a compost pile. So there's multiple things happening here. So definitely works. I agree with her. And in the fall, it works great because you have all those leaves and garden plants and everything. Good stuff.
So sometimes when Young Ben gets the question from Leonard, he shares it with me, and sometimes he doesn't. I've never been so happy to not know where this comment was going to be, where we were headed. Yeah, man. I mean, that's, I don't, obviously, you've done a lot more reading on this and actually doing it than I have. I have watched a documentary. There are a few channels out there that kind of go and really interview and work through, some unique living situation that has to do with growing food and so on. Maybe semi off grid, like that's one of my jams, right? And so I have seen comments around kind of the way that waste is managed. I've seen feedback on that. And the only note that I feel like I've read multiple times is, you have to be careful of medications that people may be on if you're using waste in that way. But that's all I have to contribute, other than, I feel like there's some rock starness in Patricia
and,
for bringing it up.
You bring up a question. I think it's a valid point, what you just said about medications and stuff. I did a video years ago about using straw mulch, and a lot of people watch it often, and the number one question I get are you worried about herbicides used? And it's like, you don't worry about it when you pee in the toilet and it goes away, or if there's another guy and he walks outside and he's like, well, I gotta go pee by a tree. He ain't worried about killing that tree because of the medication he's on. I don't understand. And part of this is just kind of like, well, I can't do anything about it, so whatever. But I don't understand the obsession behind it. And it may have made me sound like a jerk or whatever, but I feel like it's just it's too much,
Pee?
Like when people go to the farms and stuff like that, and you're getting like, you're not worried about that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? When you go to the grocery store and whatnot. So it's weird to me. I feel like it's something to freak out about that, like, we can't really control. You know what I mean? And I don't know, like, is there a list of medications that could be in your urine that would be a problem for adding to compost or to anywhere?
I don't know. Listen, let's don't rain on Patricia and me.
Hey, she didn't say anything about it. You did. You brought it up.
Well, don't rain on me. Well, no, we're kindred spirits now. We're arm in arm. So you rain on me about this, compost urine, then you're raining on her too. No, in all seriousness, I do think that there is something there around the things that we object to.
Right.
That's a whole other episode. That maybe need to be a Patreon subscription episode, because the place I need to dig into to get there.
That's one of those experimental episodes you don't know where it's going to go. And to be clear, I don't know how I feel about it either. But I know that I can't concern myself too much with it, because I feel like I would never put anything in my garden. You know what I mean? Like, I'd be like, I'd go to Lowe's and be like, what's on the MS data for this bag of soil? Like, what went in it? You know?
We're over, but one final note, and there's a delay. So I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to stop talking until I know it's my time to close this out. So a lot of the seedlings that I buy, like, my brassicas, almost all of them, I've continued to buy transplants. And I talked to you about this earlier in the year, I think. It's like, those things are beautiful. Now, generally speaking, when I'm buying them in the spring, the cabbage moth isn't out. But once you get later into, they still have some at the end of April and they still look beautiful. You know that there's been some spray happening at some point between, where they were grew and then dropping them off at your local Home Depot or Lowe's, right? But I still look at it to say I use organic methods. Like, once I've adopted this thing, it's all about how I treat it once it gets into my garden, right? So let's just, the easiest way to avoid all of that would be to start everything from seed. But then I could dig deeper and say, well, are there traces of insert the thing I'm concerned about in the seed that was harvested from the plant that was grown? Like, yeah, it's definitely a Pandora's box.
It's a Pandora's box that we may have to open on another show, but this is not the one for it, everybody. Because you're exactly right. There's I've had seedlings sit outside that got ravished, and I had to spray them, so at some, you've had aphids in your house. You know what I mean? Like, that, like, if they're in a...
Who?
Yeah. We both.
Oh,
I was just trying to put it on. I was just trying to pin it all on you. Don't be trying to overtalk me on this one.
Actually, if I want to tell the world that I had aphids in my house, let me tell the world.
You did.
Well, in this moment, I didn't. We have like thousands of new listeners. They didn't hear me that time. No. Yeah, I've had aphids in my house. I've had cabbage worms in my house when I brought greens in. So let's just keep it really real, son.
Now, how aphids get into our house, I haven't figured that out. But that being said, in a big greenhouse where there, you know that these things are in there. So yeah, there's probably stuff sprayed on them. And then it's funny, I've never even thought about it, but you're exactly right. There it is, everybody. We're going to have to cut this one because we could go on for another hour about this, which we may do in the future. Because you know what? We do a couple things here. We learn to grow, and we grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out the Backyard Gardens podcast.
If you like what we're doing and you want to continue to support the podcast, head over to our Patreon page to sign up.
You can also make a one-time donation using PayPal. Both of these links are in the description.
With your support, we can continue growing and helping others in their gardens. See ya.
If you guys want some Backyard Gardens gear,
go to the link below and check out our t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and other gear.
All purchases go towards helping to support the show, so thank you so much in advance, and we hope you enjoy. We want everybody to have a garden, and we're going to give you a chance to win free seeds every month.
Head over to backyardgardenstv.com and enter your email address to be entered in all of our giveaways.
Good luck.
We want you to be a part of our gardening community. DM us a picture of your garden at Backyard Gardens TV on Instagram, and we will share it with our listeners.